This is gonna be a bit of a lighter talk at the end of a pretty busy week. And yeah, the full title was really long, so I just made it really small and put the subtitle as the big thing that you see. So don't worry too much about what it says in the subtitle. This is work done with Tean, who's sitting over there. So if you have questions at the end of this, please find me or him, although he might be back on his way back home when we finish. And I'll start with a little kind of history of punishment and of art, and hopefully not get you too bored with technical stuff. So this is Lady Justice or Justitia from the Vatican, very famous Raphael fresco. And you probably have heard of these scales, the feather of truth, judging someone's deeds. But I think not many people talk about the sword in her hand, which I think is kind of the interesting part. So the sword in her hand, in most artistic interpretations of this, basically means that justice is swift and it's cruel and it's usually certain. Right? But I'm more interested in this idea of, okay, what if it isn't certain? And because I'm Romanian, I decided to do a little history lesson on some Romanian revolution. So these three handsome men on the top left of the screen over there are Horia, Toshka, and Krishan. Those aren't their real names. They're nicknames for some reason, but yeah, this stuck in history. And this is a revolution that happens at the end of the 18th century in Romania, in a region called Transylvania. And this region was under the Austro-Habsburgic Empire, so the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And it's a pretty interesting story of persecution, racial persecution, religious persecution of these Romanian peasants who didn't have any rights whatsoever. Most of the rights were held by the nobility, which used to be German or Hungarian at the time in this region. And in many words, you could say, okay, what the taxation laws were like, but in practice, they were literally slaves. So they would work 4 to 5 days of their work weeks, and all of those 4 to 5 days that they worked, their proceeds would go to the nobility, and then the rest of the 2 or 3 days, depending on region, they would use for themselves. And at the end of the 18th century, these guys started making a ruckus about, okay, why we should get our tax laws back, and petition to King Joseph II about fixing these tax laws. King Joseph II didn't very much like this idea and sent an army to Transylvania that put down this rebellion, arresting 300 odd revolutionaries, sentencing 37 people to death, and killing 3 of them, the leaders of the revolution. So it's actually kind of funny that they sentenced 37 people to death, only killed 3 of them, but they did kill them in spectacularly macabre fashion. They broke them on the wheel, then they took certain parts of their bodies and displayed them in various cities in Transylvania, so people would see what happens to revolutionaries after the fact. Okay, and why am I giving this really long-winded talk about some revolutionaries in Romania? Well, a few reasons. Toshka, this guy on the right there, is directly related to my girlfriend. So in a way, he's my great, great, great grandfather-in-law, I suppose. So yeah, that's one of the reasons. Another reason, I guess, is because probably you've all seen this movie. So that's not a fresco of Mel Gibson, but maybe you know who that is. That's William Wallace in Braveheart. And I think most of you have seen the movie, but don't know if most of you have read the short little story that happens in the credits of the movie, where they describe how he was split in like 100 different parts that were put in various places in England so people would know what happens to revolutionaries. But yeah, that's pretty gruesome. And then another reason is that 4 years after this Romanian Revolution, this happened. And many people actually credit the Romanian Revolution directly to the leaders of the French Revolution. So it turns out the peasant story was really popular in Stockholm, of all places, and the Swedes wrote a nice play about this whole conflict. which ended up motivating the French revolutionaries to do this. And that's the execution of King Louis of France. Right? And 14th, 15th, I don't know. 16th? Thank you. But okay, why is the French Revolution interesting? Well, that thing that they're using there, the gallows, the French word for it, potence, actually means power. So yeah, that's a show of power. But why are they actually using gallows? Turns out decapitated heads are really easy to put on spikes, so you can display what happens to bad guys. And interestingly, the whole thing of the French revolutionaries was that, okay, you've used these gallows to display what happens to peasants who break the law. Now we'll use the gallows to display what happens to the nobility who breaks the law. Although the law, there is a pretty soft concept, so maybe don't quote me on that. And I took these ideas and I combined them with evolutionary game theory, which is this kind of really popular biological framework, and especially inspired by two things, kind of costly signaling, that's a springbok jumping around, and there's no real reason to do this from a kind of survival point of view. Predators tend to see jumping deer-like creatures very easily, and it seems to be a show of fitness. You can also see this in peacocks, pretty obvious example where they have these really large colorful feathers and they're basically signaling to their mates, look, I'm a good mate because even though I'm so easy to see and so easy to catch, well, I'm still alive. So there must be something going on here. And then the other thing is this really neat paper by Francisco. If you've been attending A-Live for a while, you might have seen him. He used to attend all of these conferences. And is this co-evolution of pre-play signaling. And I thought this was a really neat paper, and I'm gonna really quickly go through what they did. So they have this really simple evolutionary game theoretic framework where people interact in a kind of economic scenario, right? And you have two people that meet, and then they both signal something. And the signal means absolutely nothing. So there is no meaning assigned to the signal. We can imagine it as numbers, colors, whatever. Let's say person one meets and says one, and at the same time, person two says two. And then after that, they decide, okay, I've seen two. I'm gonna cooperate with this person. And the other guy says, I've seen one, I'm gonna defect to this person. There's absolutely no meaning assigned to this, and you would expect it wouldn't do anything, but actually, it does. You have this evolution of a secret handshake. Although in this case, it's kind of a stag hunt game. They also do a prisoner's dilemma game where it's really a secret handshake. In a stag hunt game, there is no incentive to actually hide what signal you're using, but you get this coordination between the two signals where people interact and they basically say, if I see the word one, I will play stag. If I see the word two, I will play rabbit or whatever you want to call it, right? And you get this huge evolution of cooperation. It works for prisoner's dilemma games as well, where it's actually a true secret handshake where you need to hide what you're doing. And it turns out that the more signals you can use, so the more of these numbers you can arbitrarily use, you get higher levels of cooperation. And what basically happens is that cooperators evolve some meaning to the signal. So let's say cooperators decide on 5 as being the secret magic number. They meet, they say, oh, if this guy says 5, then it means it's a cooperator. And slowly defectors explore these signals, and at some point they stumble upon it. And then the defectors who stumble upon it are like, yeah, I know how to exploit these guys. 5. That's the secret number where I know if I see a 5, I can defect against this guy and get away scot-free. And then cooperators have to find a different signal. And you get these cyclical behaviors, but if you compute the stationary distribution, so in other words, how long they spend in each of these states, which is the thing in the top right, then you see that they spend a lot of time on these signals. Cooperators are much more incentivized to find a signal, and then defectors eventually, when they stumble upon it, they get to exploit them. And inspired about these works, Thean and I decided to do a simple model of punishment with this. So in other words, you have signals that evolve meaning. Okay, what happens if signals already have meaning? So we'll give the signal a meaning, and in this case, the meaning is I will punish you. And in this case, we'll take a simple model of peer punishment where, okay, you have a guy coming along, cooperating, the other guy defects him, and then this cooperator loses payoff, right? He gets exploited, and then he says, okay, I'll punish you. So out comes the hammer, and now both of these guys lose payoff, right? Punishment basically means I will pay a cost, so you will lose a cost, whether that's punching you and spending a night in jail or whatever it may be. Right? And this idea of threat of punishment, you get this exact same scenario, except once I've punished someone, I will kind of broadcast it to other people. Watch out, look, this is what happens if you mess with me, right? I will punch you. I don't care if I spend the night in jail, right? And now out comes these other types of defectors. We'll call them DTs, or defectors who respond to threat. You can call them scaredy cats, I guess, who see the signal and they normally would defect against you. But now they think about it and they're like, well, I don't really want to get punched in the face. And so when this guy cooperates, this other guy cooperates. And then the question is, okay, can these guys ever be successful if they just respond to the signal? And this is nice because now everyone gets positive payoff. There's not all this punishment that goes on. And the answer is, well, if you do this, yeah, it kind of works. So this is kind of social welfare plotted here. So in other words, what's the average payoff like? And it turns out that before signaling, you get this really bad thing where the only time you actually get cooperation is when punishment is very effective, and everyone is doing basically horribly because they have to pay the cost to punish, and then they have to get punished in order to learn not to do this behavior. But if you have the threat of punishment, then you suddenly get a lot of cooperation, and people don't generally defect. But okay, this is all kind of an interesting kind of result, pretty neat analytical results. But we thought, okay, in the real world, we don't really punch other people that often. There's an institution that deals with this stuff. And so, yeah, pretty simple. You just take an institution and you put the same exact thing, but now it's not the individuals who are doing the punishment, it's the institution who is doing the punishment. And so there's kind of two assumptions you can make here about visibility. And this is kind of a simple lattice network. And the first assumption is that I will only be afraid if I directly see that there is punishment. And that's the top panel over there. The red arrow basically means I will defect to this person first before being afraid. In other words, I have to get punished before I'm really afraid of punishment. And another way you can look at it is kind of second order punishment, where I look around me, I look at my friends, and if one of my friends gets punished, then I'm like, well, if my friend got punished, then there's a reasonable chance that I might get punished too. And this is kind of what a normal defector would look like in this scenario. So if they cooperate, they get a reward. If you cooperate, your co-player defects, you get this sucker's payoff. And if you defect, you get punished. That's the minus Q over there. But now you get these DT players that if they ever see punishment, then they're basically cooperators. So for the rest of this round, they act as if they are cooperators. And then in any interaction in the same kind of generation until you do this behavioral update, they would act that exact way. Like they know, at least in the near past, some punishment has happened, and so we'll just cooperate. And you put this in a well-mixed network, a complete graph, and turns out nothing really happens. Like, yeah, okay, something happens, but it's kind of meaningless. You have this equilibrium between D and DT players, which kind of makes sense. And then costs are a bit better, but like not really. So yeah, you would think, yeah, this doesn't really work. But then you put it on networks and something seems to happen. Like cooperation seems to stay the same, but it's at least a bit interesting. So you get this kind of first order punishment where cooperators basically act the same. And then the second one where these defectors and cooperators coexist in some way. And okay, that's pretty interesting. Let's plot it and see what the costs look like. And turns out for regular graphs, it's not really that interesting. But if you have more complex graphs, so kind of scale-free networks, social networks that you might see online, you get this really good improvement in social welfare. Cooperation, not so much, but it's still kind of an improvement. And sorry, that figure is very rough, by the way. I did this in like the last week of my PhD and I needed some fast results and I never got to update that figure. But yeah, pretty rough results. Still, there is a there. And okay, really quickly, we'll go to some conclusions. If you are a Romanian peasant, then those are the guys you should be afraid of. If you are a French noble, then yeah, you should be afraid of the other guys. And then signals can get meaning just with pure evolutionary dynamics. And I think that's cool. And then sometimes examples are more effective than sticks. And I think this is a thing where in a perfect society, we would actually like this to happen, where you don't actually need to put people in the newspapers for whatever happens on Epstein's Island, or I don't know. But yeah, I think there is something there. And then fear of punishment means less punishment. And this is kind of the whole thing where if you just look at cooperation, sometimes it doesn't tell the full story. And I think it's important to look at cost and it's important to look at social welfare. And then if your model seems like it doesn't work, then maybe you just need to put it on a network. Yeah, thanks.